The galaxy is a ledger. A vast, cold accounting of strength and weakness, of predator and prey. We, the Kthari, knew this better than most. We were architects. Builders of wonders that brushed the bellies of nebulae. Our strength was not in claws or plasma, but in mind, in order, in the immutable logic of mathematics and music-made matter. We believed we had catalogued every possible expression of strength in the cosmic index. Then we met the Terrans. And our ledgers burned. My name is Kalanvesh, Third Symphony of the Grand Chorus. I was a scholar of xenocultural harmonics. My purpose was to observe, to calculate the place of new species within the great galactic symphony. I was stationed on the frontier world of Lyra Prime, a gentle world of crystalline forests and singing sands, when the devourer swarm descended. They were a blight. A locust horde of chitin and gnashing mouths, strip-mining biospheres into sterile rock. They did not communicate. They did not bargain. They only consumed. Our elegant energy projectors, which could split an atom with a harmonic resonance, sputtered against their sheer, chaotic numbers. Our fortresses of light fell to the relentless tide of claw and acid. On the 7th day of the siege, as the final defensive dome over the Lyra Prime capital flickered, a new signature blinked into the system. A Terran vessel. A blocky, angular thing they called a bulk hauler. It was not a warship. It was a cargo scow. To us, it was a final pitiful footnote to our extinction. The human ship, the UCSS John H. Patterson, requested landing clearance under something called the Frontier Aid and Mutual Defense Pact. A protocol we'd glossed over in their cultural file. It sounded like bureaucratic noise. Desperation, however, is a potent simplifier. We granted clearance. I was assigned as their liaison. A final, mournful duty. To witness the death of another sentient species alongside my own. They disembarked in the grand hangar, now scarred by near misses. There were 12 of them. Not soldiers. Not by our metrics. They wore patched environment suits, stained with fluids I did not care to identify. Their leader was a female human, Captain Elena Rostova. Her face was not the serene mask of a Kthari commander. It was a map of faded scars and weary, alert eyes that scanned our beautiful crumbling spires not with awe, but with a chillingly pragmatic assessment. Captain Rostova, I chimed, my voice modulating through the translator. Your assistance is noted. But you must understand. The swarm numbers in the millions. Our most potent harmonics have failed. Your vessel is unarmed. The logical course is to evacuate what few you can and depart before the final dome falls. Rostova looked at me, then at my chorus superior, whose light forms were dim with despair. She popped the seal on her helmet. The air hissed. She took a breath of our doomed air, and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the baring of teeth. Evacuation's off the table, Symphony Kalan, she said, her voice rough, bypassing the translator's polish. We're not here for a dignified retreat. We're here to dig in. One of her crew, a hulking male with Henderson stenciled on his suit, hefted a crate from their shuttle. It hit the deck with a thud that spoke of profound density. Where's your main power relay? He asked, his tone that of a technician asking for a spanner. We were baffled. It was illogical. It was suicide. It was disrespectful of the solemnity of our end. My superior pulsed with soft, dismissive violet. Let them play at being warriors. Their ignorance will be brief. I was ashamed of my own agreement. We saw their tools, physical saws, arc welders, canisters of combustible fuel. We saw their lack of unified energy fields, their primitive projectile weapons. They were an anachronism. A species that had stumbled into the stars clutching its club and its fire, unaware that the cosmos had moved beyond such brutish things. For 2 cycles, we watched them. While we prepared our final harmonies, our songs of elegant demise, they worked. They swarmed over our defensive perimeter not with grace, but with a furious, sweaty desperation. They didn't repair our harmonic projectors. They ripped out the delicate crystal foci and replaced them with crude, high-yield thermal batteries from their ship. They took our beautifully calibrated gravity plates and welded them into uneven barricades. They strung wires, physical, conductive wires, all over our plaza, creating a chaotic web. Henderson and a human named Chavez were at the main relay. Instead of retuning its harmonic resonance, they were forcibly overloading its containment buffers, jury-rigging a primitive plasma cascade. I protested. You'll turn the entire node into a fusion bomb. The yield could crack the planet's crust. Chavez, her face smeared with grime, grinned up at me. The math checks out. Probably. It'll only take out, say, 100-kilometer radius. That's the backup plan. The primary plan's gotta earn its pay first. The primary plan was even more insane. Rostova had studied the swarm's attack patterns. They were a wave, a single-minded organism. She didn't want to scatter them. She wanted to channel them. To funnel the entire million-strong swarm into the main thoroughfare, where her chaotic web of wires and her jury-rigged, overloaded relay waited. It's a cattle drive, she explained to me, pointing at a hand-drawn schematic on a scrap of plastifilm. But the cattle are acid-spitting bug monsters from hell, and the chute is your city's sacred avenue of ancestors. I felt a profound cultural vertigo. They were turning our masterpiece of urban planning, a place of meditation and sonic sculpture, into a slaughterhouse run. The swarm did not wait for our preparations to be complete. The primary dome failed with a sound like a dying crystal choir. The sky turned black with descending spore ships, disgorging their living cargo into the crystalline forests. The singing sands screamed as they were digested. From our command spire, we watched the tide of chitin flow through the outer districts, dissolving our art, our history, our homes. Our remaining projectors fired, picking off hundreds, but thousands replaced them. Despair, cold and absolute, settled in my core light. Then, the human comms channel crackled to life. It was not a harmonic broadcast. It was a raw, electromagnetic shout. Patterson to all hands. Bells ringing. Playtime's over. Henderson, light the porch light. Chavez, get the welcome mat ready. Everyone else, remember, aim for the joints, and for the love of God, keep the music off the line. Music? What music? Below, in the fortified plaza, I saw the humans take up positions. Not in a disciplined phalanx, but in scattered, seemingly random nests of cover. They checked their clubs, their projectile rifles. They shared a short, sharp laughter I could not comprehend. Rostova stood atop a barricade, not hiding, looking at the approaching darkness. She pulled a small curved device from her belt, put it to her lips, and a piercing rhythmic shriek echoed over the rumble of the swarm. It was a terrible sound. A primal, shrieking whistle. A battle hymn from the caves of their ancestry. The swarm hit the first funnel point, a wide, beautiful bridge. It erupted. Not from our energy weapons, but from chemically propelled explosives the humans had buried beneath the artistry of its masonry. The bridge didn't just fall, it was vaporized in a fireball of shocking orange and black, a vulgar, violent spectacle. Hundreds of swarm died instantly. The Kthari around me recoiled at the brutality of it. Such wasteful force. But it worked. The swarm, mindless, flowed around the crater, channeled by the rubble into the avenue of ancestors, just as Rostova had predicted. Then the true nightmare began. The swarm poured into the avenue, a river of death filling the chute. The humans opened fire. The sound was not the soft hum of our projectors. It was a cacophony, a deafening staccato roar of gunfire, interspersed with the crump of grenades. It was noise. It was chaos given sound. And they were terrible shots. By our standards. They didn't aim for center mass with harmonic precision. They fired in controlled bursts, laying down intersecting fields of fire. They shot to wound, to maim, to create obstacles of twitching, screeching swarm bodies that slowed the advance. They used their crude weapons to shape the battlefield, to control the flow of the enemy. I saw Henderson, manning a heavy weapon that spat fire at a rate that defied belief, its barrel glowing red-hot. He was screaming, a raw wordless roar that merged with the weapon's snarl. Chavez was darting between cover points, not firing often, but when she did, a swarm elite at the rear would explode in a puff of acidic viscera. Precise, clinical murder amidst the bedlam. And Rostova, she was everywhere. Not with the strength of 10, but with the presence of 100. She directed fire with hand signals when comms were jammed. She dragged a wounded human, a young one named Kaito, back behind cover while firing one-handed with her sidearm, hitting a pouncing swarm warrior in its open maw. She was a conductor, but her orchestra was one of thunder and rage. But logic was logic. Numbers were numbers. The swarm inched forward, a living Glacier of death. Acid splashed. A human cry cut through the din. One of theirs, a man named Petrov, was pulled from his position. He didn't scream for long. The humans didn't falter. They closed the gap, their firing becoming more frantic. They were running out of ammunition. They were being pushed back to the final barricade, before the main power relay. Our final stronghold. My chorus superior turned to me, light pulsing a dirge. It was a valiant, if primitive, effort. Their defiance was, statistically improbable. But it ends now. Prepare the elegy for a sun's setting. As the elegy's first notes began to form in our communal mind, I looked down, not at the swarm, but at the humans. I expected to see the despair I felt. The acceptance of the inevitable. I did not. I saw Rostova, bleeding from a gash on her brow, standing on the barricade again. The shrieking whistle was back in her mouth. She blew a series of short, defiant blasts. And the humans, they answered. Not with a harmonious chord, but with a roar. A ragged, furious, human roar that rolled up from the plaza, challenging the screeches of the swarm, challenging the very inevitability of the universe. In that roar, I did not hear fear. I heard a refusal. An absolute, universe-denying NO. Henderson, out of ammunition for his big gun, picked up a fallen piece of support girder, a 2-meter length of solid metal, and waded into the front line of swarm, swinging it like a prehistoric axe. Chavez was on the relay console, her fingers a blur, pulling out safety overrides we didn't even know existed. Rostova to Patterson. The welcome mat is now hot. Pull back. 30 seconds. The humans broke contact. Not a rout, but a sudden coordinated sprint away from the relay, toward the inner vault doors. They left the swarm victorious on the barricade, a seething mass pouring into the killing zone directly before the overloaded power core. Rostova was the last to leave. She stood for a second, facing the tide. Then she threw something, a small green cylinder, into the mass at the base of the relay. Not a grenade. A canister of the same crude combustible fuel they'd used in their welders. It ignited. A sheet of flame, beautiful and terrible in its primitiveness, washed over the front ranks of the swarm. It did little damage. But it got their attention. Every single sensory organ in that seething mass focused on her, on this small bleeding creature that dared to spit fire at them. She turned and ran. The swarm, with a collective shriek of rage, surged after her, compressing into the epicenter of the plaza, right over the chaotic web of wires, right under the humming, sparking mass of the relay. Now Chavez. Rostova screamed, diving for cover. Chavez slammed her fist onto the console. The relay didn't fire a harmonic beam. It didn't do anything elegant. It exploded. But not chaotically. The wild energy discharge hit the web of wires the humans had strung. For a nanosecond, a lattice of pure, arcing lightning filled the avenue of ancestors. A cage of electricity, a net of man-made lightning, captured the entire forward momentum of the swarm and cooked it alive. The air itself ionized, smelling of ozone and burnt chitin. The flash was searing white, etching the shadows of 1,000 swarm warriors onto the walls in an instant before they disintegrated. The following shockwave was physical, a fist of thunder that shattered the remaining stained crystal windows for kilometers. It knocked me from my observation platform. Silence. A ringing, painful silence, broken only by the crackle of dying electricity and the drip of molten stone. We stumbled out. The avenue was a charnel house. A single, catastrophic wound. And at its edge, slowly rising from behind their cover, were 11 humans. Covered in soot, blood, and sweat. Exhausted. Alive. They had not won with superior technology. They had not won with flawless strategy. They had won by turning their own battlefield into a bomb, by using the enemy's mindless rage as a weapon, by sacrificing their own sanctity of place, and ours, without a second thought. They had won by being more terrible, more adaptable, and more ferociously stubborn than the mindless terror that opposed them. In the days that followed, as the shattered remnants of the swarm were mopped up, a quiet fell over Lyra Prime. Not the quiet of despair, but the quiet of awe. I walked the scarred avenue with Captain Rostova. The beautiful sonic sculptures were slag. The singing stones were silent. I felt a grief for the lost beauty. Rostova saw my dimmed light. "I'm sorry about your art," she said, her voice quiet now, stripped of its battle husk. You saved our lives. Our species. Art can be remade. I paused, my translator struggling with the concept. But your methods, the violence, the chaos, the waste. We could never have conceived of it. She bent down, picked up a piece of twisted metal from one of their barricades, and a shard of our beautiful blue crystal. She held them together in her palm. You see waste. A ruined sculpture and a piece of junk. She looked at me, her eyes holding the memory of the fire. We see the same thing, raw materials. The sculpture was beautiful. The barricade did its job. One was for peace. One was for war. But they're just stuff. What matters isn't the stuff, Kalen. It's the hand that shapes it. And the will behind the hand. In that moment, I understood. We Kthari worshipped harmony, stability, the perfect, preserved note. Humans were not musicians. They were composers of reality itself. They heard not a symphony to be preserved, but a chaos to be arranged, even for a moment, into a shape that served their purpose. They would burn a masterpiece to fuel a forge to make a tool to save a friend. Their morality was not in the preservation of things, but in the protection of lives. It was terrifying. It was profoundly creative. It was the opposite of the swarm's mindless consumption. It was a conscious, willful, and sometimes brutal reshaping. My chorus superior, its light humbled, spoke to the gathered Terran survivors later. You have shown us a new form of strength. Not the strength of the perfect shield, but the strength of the unbreakable will. The strength to look into the abyss and not only refuse to blink, but to spit into it, and use its own rage to forge a weapon. Henderson, his arm in a sling, grinned. Yeah, well. Sometimes you just gotta hit the problem until it stops being a problem. We laughed. A strange, harmonic sound mixed with their rough, barking laughter. It was a new sound. The first note of a new symphony. The galaxy has gods. Beings of immense power and age who shape stars and ponder eternal truths. I have heard it whispered in the dark between the stars, that some of these ancient beings fear the Terrans. I did not understand why a god would fear a fragile, short-lived creature of flesh and bone. Now I know. Gods fear the blacksmith who can melt down a holy altar to forge a plowshare to feed his village, or a sword to defend it. They fear the creature for whom no law, not of physics, not of society, not of decency, is truly immutable if it stands between them and the survival of their own. They fear the terrifying, beautiful, creative rage of a species that will, with equal ingenuity, build a cradle for a child or an engine of apocalyptic vengeance from the same principles, with the same hands. They do not fear human weapons. They fear human will. The will that looks at a fortress and sees a pile of stones. That looks at a star and sees an engine. That looks at a god and sees just another problem to solve. I, Kalenvesh, once a scholar of harmony, now study the Terran spirit. I fought beside them on Lyra Prime. I witnessed them turn a funeral dirge into a war chant, and a graveyard into a foundation. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human. Music swells, then fades to ambient starship hum.